Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Sweet Thursday. Welcome back to the new season. Hope you had a good summer. We were hoping to be able to do this live, but the Delta variant has made us pause for a few more months. Our current plan for Sweet Thursday is to remain virtual for the rest of 2021 and then return to in-person programs in January, alternated with some occasional virtual Zoom programs for authors who aren't in the area. For our live events at the Don Tatson Community Hall next year, we will be requiring that all attendees show proof of vaccination to enter the building, and other details about those events will come out later. Today we're on a Zoom webinar, and unlike meeting, we can't see or hear any of you. Q&A will be open for you to type in your questions for our author. You can do that anytime during the event, but we will get to them at the end after a conversation. All of our programs can be seen on our YouTube channel shown here. Sweet Thursday is the author series hosted by the Friends of the Lafayette Library. My name is Jeff Deaton, and I'm the coordinator of the program. Ruth Thornburg will be moderating tonight's program with our guest, author Carol Edgarian. We have some upcoming events in webinar format. For Sweet Thursday on October 21st, we will welcome Michelle Richmond via Zoom also to discuss her latest book, The Wonder Test. I haven't updated this slide, but just today we confirmed that on November 18th, Gail Tsukiyama will be here with The Color of Air. Upcoming Wonders of the World, our museum docent series, include October 13th with a docent from the Legion of Honor talking about sculptor and artist from Kenya and America, Wangechi Mutu. And then on November 10th, we will have a program, actually a formal program, semi-presentation on the Mount Diablo State Park Centennial. On November 7th, the Lafayette Historical Society will host a talk on the evolution of interurban and commuter rail travel in the Bay Area. In order to learn about all of our programming, you can sign up for our weekly ad lib emails, which describe our upcoming events. And this includes the foundation and other library events. And these are what two of them look like, and they appear in your email every Saturday morning. And this can be accomplished by going to this website and just filling out this simple information, and then you'll get the emails every week. And that's llcf.org/subscribe. For even more programming, you can go to the county website and sign up there and look into programs. The Friends Corner Bookshop reopened a number of months ago, so you can stop by and browse for inexpensive and gently used books. The money we raise by selling those funds a variety of programs, and those include librarian salaries for Sunday hours, books and other materials at the library, library programs, Friends programs like this and WOW, and support the foundation and the Historical Society as well. The Friends Amazon store is open as well and can be accessed by the Friends tab on the library website. As always, I'd like to thank the support I get from the Friends, from the library staff, from the foundation, and most importantly, my Sweet Thursday committee members, including tonight's moderator. And Carol's book, among other places, can be purchased at our local bookstore, Rinda Books. and we're on social media. So tonight our moderator is well known to you. Ruth Thornburg has volunteered for many years at the library and has been on the board and has been president of the board. She's moderated a number of these events, and for which I am eternally grateful. And tonight she's going to have a nice conversation with our author. And so I will invite Ruthie to now turn on her, let me go off screen share. There we go. And I will now shut up. Here you go, Ruth. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jeff, for that background information. Tonight, we're going to be talking with Carol Edgarian, who's written a book called, her most recent book is called Vera, and we're going to have time to discuss a lot of the details about that. But first, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Carol. She is a New York Times best-selling novelist. She's an essayist. She's a teacher and an editor. Her novels include Vera, which we've mentioned, we're going to talk about tonight, 3 Stages of Amazement, and Rise the Euphrates. Carol's articles and essays have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, NPR, and W, among many other places. And she co-edited The Writer's Life, an intimate thoughts on work, love, inspiration, and fame from the diaries of the world's great writers. She's a frequent speaker at conferences and schools on topics such as why stories matter, the art of fiction, and publishing today. In 2003, Carol and her husband, Tom Jenks, founded the nonprofit Narrative, a leading digital publisher of fiction, poetry, essay, and arts. And we're also going to have time to talk about that tonight because it's very interesting what they're doing. 7 years ago, Carol launched Narrative in the schools, a program that augments Narrative's library of literature and with free video tutorials, lessons plans, a writing contest for high schoolers, and other essential tools for teachers and students in underserved communities around the world. So with no further ado, I would like to welcome Carol Edgarian. There you are.
Hi, thank you, Ruthie.
Sure.
Wonderful to be here.
Yeah, but we're excited to start our season with you, and I'm looking forward to tonight's discussion. The book, Vera, was published, and just your most recent book. It takes place during the San Francisco earthquake and fire of 1906. So I thought it might be fun to hear you give us an introduction by reading the first part of the story.
Oh, great! I would love to. So I'll just read I'll read the first page and then a bit. How's that? I always thought of my city as a woman, but the house, it turned out, was a woman too. When the quake hit, she groaned. Her timbers strained to hold on to their pins, the pins snapping. And the rocks beneath the house, they had voices too. And if ever I wondered how long it would take for the world to end, I know, 45 seconds. An unearthly stillness preceded and followed the shaking. It's what we did and didn't do in the stillness that determined the rest of our days. I lost 2 mothers that year. The first was Rose. I can't say where she was born or where her kin came from. The fact is, I don't know what mix of blood flows through me. I suspect there's some Persian, possibly Armenian. I understand there may be some Northern African and Spanish in the mix too, and a good pour of French. Spanish by way of Mexico. None of this Rose would confirm or deny. We're mutts, she said, and left it at that. One of the harlots claimed that Rose had been found as a waif in the slums of Mexico City. For a fee, she was brought north. I believe that. I believe most anything when it comes to Rose. She spoke 5 languages, her hair was blue-black, her skin copper, her eyes green. In San Francisco, she became a much favored prostitute, catering to the gold rush miners. Her next clients were the fellows who came after the miners, the suit-wearing bankers and merchants who thought they could gentle a murderous, gambling, whoring town. They thought they could gentle Rose. Instead, she became the grande dame of the Barbary Coast, the Rose of the Rose. She did not raise me. That duty fell to a Swedish widow employed to bring me up to be, I suppose, anything but a hooker. In that, Maury Johnson was successful. I am not a hooker. I am only a thief.
Thank you for that. And I really think that last sentence sets up a lot of questions about where the story what we're going to learn about this person, Vera. I found Vera to be, a really interesting character. She had a lot of spunk. She had a lot of personality. She had a lot of issues. And I'm kind of curious how you, or what you based her character upon. Was there some inspiration about her in particular that you could share with us?
Well, I had the notion of writing an adventure story, but an adventure story that featured a girl on the cusp of womanhood in a time when convention demanded a certain, for young women to be a certain way. And as I thought about her, she came to me as contrary to expectations in every way. First, she is the daughter of the most successful madam in town. But she is not being raised by her mother. She's being raised by a foster mother who is sort of the opposite of a madam, but who has her own problems, a gambling debts, a drinking problem. So this notion to me of writing about misfits, writing about someone who doesn't fit in any sort of preordained box. And then, of course, San Francisco in the time of 1906 was a really corrupted place. It was, I don't want to get ahead of where the questioning will go, but in the morning of the quake, the mayor was going to be indicted and instead got this quake. So where I started with Vera, and as she became more fuller and fuller, and of course, at the end of the book, we learn that she is very old. Our narrator, she's a very old woman, the oldest living survivor. And what would it have been like to survive that quake and to be essentially completely on your own as a 15-year-old girl? That was interesting to me. And the more I thought about it, and the more these other characters came forward, I was sort of off to the races.
Yeah, I can see that in the story. I really found that setting this coming of age story into the earthquake and fire added just such a big element. I think all of us can relate to living in this part of the country and what that means. We all have our experiences, and they vary, but that always looms in the background, the potential for that kind of an event to happen here. And I just felt like, putting that in the center of the story was, historically, it was very interesting, but it was almost a character itself, the city and what it was going through. And so I thought it would be interesting to just learn a little bit more about your research into the earthquake and how you got some of this information. I felt like there was a lot that was true and obviously a lot that's fictionalized, but the true elements were really fascinating. And anyway, I would just love for you to talk a little bit about the earthquake, your research, and kind of how you learned about these things and why you were inspired to include that as such a big part of the
I never know what's going to sort of find me in a moment of questioning. And I've been fascinated by the quake. I started collecting books on the quake, a few decades ago. And of course there's the quake, and then there were the 3-4 days of fire that really reduced San Francisco to ashes. And it seemed to me, as I got deeper into the research, and there's such incredible stuff. I encourage any of you who've read the book and want to go a little deeper, go online to the San Francisco Museum, the San Francisco Historical Society. The Berkeley Library has incredible stuff. Photographs, primary sources like the newspapers of the day, but also these really incredible firsthand accounts of people who'd survived and how they survived. And the deeper and deeper I went, there was just so much story. I could have written 10 books, but I spent a couple years researching and sort of mapping out the arc of the book. And it was interesting. What brought me to think about writing about 1906 was actually the lead up to the 2016 election. And it seemed to me that in America at this time, so many of our norms were being destroyed, and the idea of society was swiftly changing and collapsing. And rather than take it head on in the moment, I thought it was really interesting to set a story in 1906 when there was all this widespread corruption in San Francisco. San Francisco was a place, as it is now, of haves and have-nots. But also in the quake and fire, in a moment, society collapses. And everyone, no matter what level of society you're at, no matter what, you have to survive. And you have to make decisions that are going to impact whether you survive. And what you mentioned about the fires that were, and all the sort of epic things we have lived through. I finished the book in January of 2020 and could never have anticipated what we were about to walk into with the pandemic. And I think what I've heard from readers is the book reads as something that having walked through the pandemic, we've all experienced, because we've all had to, in different moments in the last 18 months, make decisions of how are we going to be in the world? What are we going to do to be safe? What moment to moment? I mean, life has changed so radically. So there's parallels. Yeah.
I can't help but think about my own experience of living in the Bay Area and going through the Loma Prieta earthquake,
Right.
and the Oakland Hills fire. And even though they're not, they didn't happen at the same time, they were still devastating events. It just, as you say, it's one of those things that within just such a short period of time, life changes in such a dramatic way. That affects everyone. And so I felt like that was well portrayed in your story.
Thank you.
You talk a lot about not just the downtrodden and the characters that Vera was sort of, getting to know and making a little community with, but the high society people who also were living in tents and trying to get by, finding food.
That's
and
right.
all of the things that had to happen. So
That's right. So the book has absolutely real life characters, including the mayor and many of the people of the moment. And then there's a whole fictional world on top of that. And, I spent a long time in sort of thinking about the story, thinking I often start with a question. And one of the questions that I started with in writing Vera is, what would you do? What would you do if faced with it's 5 o'clock in the morning, pre-dawn, your house is hanging by a thread. Some of your family have been wounded. You don't know when the next aftershock is coming. What do you grab in your house? How do you get out of your house? Do you have the wits? Are you grabbing photographs, or are you grabbing good boots and things that are going to help you survive? And then, of course, what would you do in a post-quake world to survive? What is your moral compass in a world that has collapsed? What are the things you will allow yourself to do, and where do you sort of draw the line? And who become your people that you count on? And I think we've all experienced that in the last year and a half, who, as things have gotten smaller and our circles have gotten smaller, who are the people you really count on? It's interesting. And you can't always anticipate that, huh?
Yeah, no, very true. It's a good way to think about it. Well, you touched a little bit on the real characters and the fictional. And that's one thing I do enjoy about a historical fiction is you learn things. And one of the things I have to just share, I was laying in bed reading the book, and there's just a short little thing that talks about one of the characters was in Santa Rosa when the quake hit, and it took her a long time to get to San Francisco because of the devastation there. And my husband was raised in Santa Rosa, so I said, hey, do you know about that? Did you grow up knowing that Santa Rosa was really devastated? Not really. So of course, I had to get out of bed and go look it up, and I learned a lot about how much Santa Rosa was devastated. And
It was just, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that's
as was Palo Alto and Stanford. And I put a thing in there, in Stanford, in the mental hospital, the whole hospital collapsed, and I found this tidbit where they tied the patients to trees.
Oh.
And I couldn't get that out of my mind. They just couldn't, they had no building, but just all the ways, Jack London and Glenn got on his horse and immediately got himself to San Francisco to write about the devastation. It was incredible. And there are great photographs. I mean, you can really get a sense of just what that looks like, both from the earthquake and the fire. But here's a story in terms of what would you do? So 5 o'clock in the morning, right? So there was a mother in Hayes Valley whose house had collapsed. The main chimney was broken in half, and she had young kids. And so there you are, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, your kids are hungry, what are you going to do? And she started to cook breakfast with her broken chimney, and the whole thing combusted, and it burned a good part of the city, and it was called the Ham and Eggs Fire.
Oh my gosh. Interesting. So that's kind of the epicenter of the fire.
Well, that was there were 50 fires in town, and at a point they all converged, and there was the mayor, who of course was hated, and there were men who'd put up a lot of money to try to get him indicted and to prosecute him, and he was a guy named Eugene Schmitz. He was a violinist. He was put in the mayoral seat just because I think he was open to being corrupted. And he actually kind of rose to the occasion. He assembled what was called the Committee of 50, including all his enemies, but these were the city leaders. and they got together to figure out what were they going to do. And they kept having to move where they were meeting because they kept getting burned out. So they started in downtown, and then they climbed to Nob Hill, and then Nob Hill caught on fire, and they just had to keep moving. But he was an interesting character. It was fun to write him.
He certainly came across that way. It made me curious to learn more about him because, that's what an important part of our history. It's interesting, we forget the sins of the past sometimes. And I think reading about it in this format, it's just very good to remind ourselves that there is a
Well, yeah, and the human animal has always been given to folly and everything in between. I'm fascinated. You have a character in a story when you can tap into that character's desire, and desire is complicated. It drives people, and it dooms them. It drives them to commit foolish acts. So here was a violinist who wanted to live the high life. And what did he do to get there? And of course, ultimately he was sentenced to San Quentin. What happened then is you'll have to read the book to find out about.
Well, talking about motivation, I made a note because I thought it was interesting that, at one point Vera talks about her motivation, and she says she's motivated by money. She and one of the characters, Tan, are talking about this, and she's really so young, but she's trying to sort out her life. And as you said earlier, what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. And, they have to survive. So she does need money in order to survive. And Tam comes up with sort of a clever way to make money, and she gets involved with him and, supports him. She decides to be fair and to be a partner with him. But I wondered, is that really what motivated Vera, or was there more behind her needs and desires?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. What motivates Vera is looking for love. She's looking to, this is, where she begins life is she has no mother, really, and no place that is really safe and home. And then of course she loses what home she had. And ultimately she does assemble this cast of fellow misfits who really become her chosen family. And you mentioned Tan, and for those who haven't read the book, Tan is Rose, the madam's butler, major domo. He is an accomplished cook. He knows wines. He's a scrapper. Everybody in the book is pretty scrappy. He's a great father to a daughter. He's a good son. He's also Chinese in 1906, which means he is a servant who lives in a grand house, but lives in the basement on cast off furniture on a dirt floor with a chamber pot. And that situation Tan finds himself in is both expected and maddening for him. And he also, on top of it, has to kind of tend Vera's house. And he is someone of great dignity, and it irritates him. And so very early on, he and Vera establish that they are rivals and enemies. And then, of course, over the course of the novel, they come to depend on each other and even become more than that they become partners. But it was interesting to me to depict in a realistic way what Tan's life was like. and to give him his dignity and to give him, and I, this is what happens in the writing of a book. You start out with an idea, and then at a certain point, if you're lucky, the characters kind of take over and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this. and sometimes wisely you learn to go with them. And Tan kept becoming more and more of the story as I got to know him, and as he showed himself in different ways.
I really did think it showed Vera's morality in a way, for her to take a step back and think about how she wanted to interact with this rival, as she described him. She could either continue to fight him or she could be fair. And that was the word that came to her, was fair.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a great example of, she was maturing and she was really taking the longer view. And all of us should do more of that. So, I thought that was a really good turning point for her.
Thank you. Thank you.
And another thing I wanted to talk about is the theme of motherhood and orphans. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about orphans in the book, and you've already said that Vera loses two mothers in the story, but there's also other characters. They're very involved in supporting orphanages. There's a lot of discussion about that, and I felt that was a theme that was sort of a thread that was running through the story. That, and then what is motherhood, and what what the needs of others for their mothers. I felt like that came across in an interesting way, and I wanted you to delve into that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, she came. Absolutely, Bobby is an orphan. And then of course there are the many orphans post-quake.
Right.
The city had 250,000 homeless.
Yeah.
And many of them were orphans. And I thought it was it's a topic that interests me. I'll say in my own story, my mother was raised in an orphanage, and so that story on my mother's side, I come from that, and on my father's side, first generation Armenians, having lived through the genocide. So that idea of something really catastrophic happening that displaces you. I think one of the central themes that I'm always working about is displacement. It seems to me a very American problem. So many of us are displaced. So many of us are looking for home, and what is home, and what in Vera's story, there was home before the quake, and then how do you fashion a home after the quake? And of course it's rudimentary, it's shelter, it's food, but it's also the people. Who are the people who bring you comfort, who share life with you? That was really interesting for me to look at coming out of a disaster for this girl. Who does she bring to her? Who shows up on her doorstep? Because many of the prostitutes are homeless, literally homeless, and some of them show up at Vera's door. And how does she judge? How does she judge people's characters? It's not how society would judge them. She's got a different sensibility. And that was interesting to explore. So that's sort of that outsider aspect of Vera.
Yeah, definitely an outsider, but she was able to open her heart as a result of
Mm-hmm.
outsider.
Yeah, she's wide open. Yep.
You mentioned Bobby, and he doesn't want to be referred to as an orphan. And I thought that was interesting too, that I never really considered what it would feel like to be called an orphan. And the fact that he do not call me an orphan, I thought that was, it said something about what that experience is. He didn't want to be labeled that. Anyway, I just.
Well, I think, you know, that spoke to his inherent pride. And also his, you know, we so casually put people into boxes with labels on them, right? And Bobby is someone who isn't going to be labeled. You know, this is a story where almost everyone in the story is a thief of one kind or another.
Have to be.
They have to be, or they don't have, or they even before they had to be, they were. And one of the things I really loved thinking about and turning on its head is, what is honor among thieves? Like, what does honor look like when everyone is a thief?
Yeah, when you have to be in order, I guess, as you say, some of them, they just were thieves, whether they needed to do that to survive or not. But, you know, between the time and this experience, where the survival instinct would kick in, and that would be something that they would have to do in order to eat and everything else. So,
you know, but also the hand of fate. You know, there are so many stories, but here's a story that you know, and we keep seeing this in the news of our day. Like, if someone had just done this one thing differently, or if this one person had been there to the head of the fire department, a guy named Dennis Sullivan, was a very forward-thinking guy. And I should say about San Francisco, San Francisco was started, you know, San Francisco, the city, was started by miners. So prostitution was a very big industry from day one of the city proper, because who catered to the miners? And before San Francisco had a police force, they had the Barbary Coast. They had, I mean, all these it was a city that was the most murderous town in the US just before 1906. So it was really just beginning to become civilized, if you will, or proper. And you know, Dennis Sullivan was this very forward-thinking fire chief. And the morning of the quake, he was asleep. Again, it's pitch dark in his house. Unbeknownst to him, the fire station next door, the roof had collapsed onto the house and literally cut the house in half, his house. His wife was asleep in a front bedroom, and he rushed to find her, make sure she was okay. And he fell several stories through his house and landed on the boiler, and was burned in 90% of his body, and died. And many people feel that had this not happened and he lived, so much of the city would have been saved, because it was soldiers who made all kinds of mistakes in fighting the fire. They just didn't know, they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't even know the city. And you think about that, like it's how much the hand of fate affects the story, the ultimate story.
it is something. I mean, when you stop and think about any major event in life, there's just so much of that.
When you think about that, yeah. And just all that we've lived through in the last 18 months.
Yes, a lot of hands of fate involved in that.
Yeah.
I kind of want to talk a little about you and your, you know, you personally, your other activities that you're involved in, and get a little bit involved in your writing style and how you do your writing. And people are generally pretty interested in, are you the kind of author that gets up every morning and writes a certain amount of time, or do you, more write by inspiration? Oh, I got this idea, I need to go in and work on it. What's your writing day like?
Well, my writing day, it depends on the day. But when I'm really cooking in a book, I don't sleep a lot. I write. I often write at night. I often write very early in the morning, but I don't wait for inspiration. I sit down and do it whenever I can, because of course I also have narrative, and we can talk about narrative, but that's also a big job. So and I have 3 daughters. They're in their 20s, but when they were small, I was grabbing time.
Sure.
One of my daughters said to me the other day that and I'd never heard this before, but she said she used to go to sleep every night hearing the sound of my keyboard. It was like her music to go to sleep. I didn't know that, but when the kids went to sleep, bang, I was at the desk. But it takes me, I'm in the beginning of a new book, and so it takes me a lot of time to just sort of circle around the nexus of what the story is. And
anything about what that next story is going to be about?
It's a little too soon. I don't want to hurt any voodoo. Sometimes if you talk it too soon, but I'm excited about it. I'm really excited about it.
Well, we'll look forward to that. Well, let's move in. I really do want to talk about narrative, and that's I didn't really know much about it, but I did do some research, and it seems like you're really doing a lot of good in not only for up and coming new promising writers and artists, but also, the program in the schools, I think is really, it sounds like it's really providing a lot of benefit. And I think, I would love to hear more about that.
Oh, great. I'd love to talk about it. So we're all digital. So if anybody's interested, narrativemagazine.com. And when we started it in 2003, we're a nonprofit, and our mission was twofold: to encourage both reading and writing in the digital age. So our commitment was to pay writers. And in 2003, that was revolutionary, to pay writers for their work online. And to also make everything we publish free to encourage readership. So fast forward, we're in the beginning of our 19th year. So, we've published, pretty much every kind of a who's who of contemporary writers, also classics, and brought forward a lot of new writers, many of whom you now know, from Min Jin Lee to Anthony Mara to Natalie Diaz, just won the Pulitzer Prize in poetry. We just announced two new Narrative Prize winners. We award the Narrative Prize each year for Best Emerging Writer. So it's been a big week already. And there are now thousands of stories and poems and essays in the narrative library. And what's happened that is so fascinating about the power of the web, and the good power of the web, is that we are read all over the world, and schools all over the world are using the narrative library to teach literature in their classrooms, because so many schools are under-resourced and simply don't have the money to buy books. So, Southeast Asia, little villages in India, in South Africa, in Russia. We have a high school contest that we run every year, and we had entries from 19 countries, including Serbia and all over Southeast Asia and Africa. And it's fascinating because we're a little nonprofit. So how do these folks hear about us?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it used to be the inhibition would be, in remote villages, do people have laptops? Do they have computers? But of course, what is pretty ubiquitous is our phones. And so kids can read narrative on their phones. And so for these teachers who are all of our heroes, they can assign the reading, and their kids can get storied, because of course, what we all know is if you leave high school without identifying as a reader, without loving to read, we've kind of lost you. We lose so many kids, that watershed age group from about 16 to 22. That's where we really want to capture people to think of themselves as readers.
No, it is important. It gets you through a life, for sure, to be a lifelong reader.
I was thinking, about, I'm such a lover of libraries, and I have such memories of I grew up in a small town in Connecticut, and we had a great library, and I can smell the library right now, and the librarian, and what the desk looked like, and that thunk when you get your card stamped.
Yeah.
But right? I mean, I was just a nerd who couldn't read enough books. And in the summer, I'd have the big index card, and you'd get a little dot every time you read a book. And my card, they'd have to give me a new card. There'd be so many dots. And that changed my life.
Yeah, I think there are so many stories about libraries.
Right.
They offer such richness to everyone, really. And we're fortunate that they're so supported in our country. And,
well, the thing I'm often asked, what does fiction do? What does story do for us? And the news tells us sort of who, what, where, when. But where story comes in is it tells us the how and the why. And why did someone do that? Why did that happen? And it gives us, it's all about connection. And it's not just connection of people, it's connection of moments in time. And then there's a great way that all Armenian stories begin. It's in Armenian, it's garuchigar. There was and there was not. And I love having that sort of at the bottom of my heart when I'm writing, because it's both things, what there was and what there wasn't. And that's just, once you know that, you have a whole story.
Yes, you do. Yes. Interesting how cultures also, share so much through their stories. And there you have just one little sentence there, but it was and it wasn't. Interesting. Well, I also want to talk about your Instagram project, which sounds like tons of fun. So tell us about that, a word, please.
Well, I probably goes without saying that I love words, but I love the story of words and how words change through time, how they start with a certain meaning and then they evolve through history. I mean, they are little compact worlds of story. And so I started doing this project. I took a little hiatus in the summer, but every Tuesday on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is my first initial C, Edgarian. I do this thing called a word please, where I take a word and I talk about where it started, what it meant when it started, and what it's come to mean, and how that is the story of who we are. And I often will write a little something about it, or I'll read a poem, or I'll invite a guest to come talk about it with me. So, I mean, just for example, one word, the word vote. The word vote started out to mean vow. So when you think about when you vote, you're actually making a vow, and all the ways that it changed through time. So it's a quick 10 minutes, and you can catch me live doing it at noon, or anytime after. It lives on my Instagram. So please come join me. I would love it. And I love hearing ideas of other words that people want me to dive into.
Well, I think it's a great exercise. I also love words. I puzzle words. I read words. I'm just, that's my thing. And my whole family knows that. And so I do get, we talk about it a fair amount because words are really
Well, come, Ruthie, come join me, fellow wordy birds.
That would be fun. Now, I always get the word game for Christmas or holidays or birthdays,
What's a word that you love?
A word that I love. Well, I'm interested in relationships and that type of thing. So I guess I should have thought of this before, but if you take a word that represents relationship, maybe you could say, let's take the word love.
Yeah.
Take that word. It expresses a lot of important things in life, probably the most important. And so, yeah, that would be an interesting one to delve into.
Yeah, love, every story is ultimately a love story. When I think about Vera, I think Vera is ultimately a love story. Yeah.
A love story of Vera, a love story of the city, and a love story of, I can see that, a love story of so much, that's what it took to make these people come together and help each other and survive.
Right. Right.
Well, I was going to say, it looks like we have put up on the chat.
Do we have any quick?
We have a link to your narrativemagazine.com.
Oh, great.
Also,
Yeah, I put your narrative magazine up there.
Oh, thank you, Jeff.
Which I checked out a few days ago, and I am so impressed with that.
Thank you.
Not just what it is, but why and how long you've been doing it. It is very cool. And I
Thank you.
continue
Well,
to check it out.
there are many hands. We have a small and mighty core staff who've been with us forever, and then over 100 volunteers work on the magazine.
Wow.
All over, and it's so many hearts and hands to make it, and of course all the supporters who keep us going.
Do you get grants? What's your funding?
We do. Both private, donations, small donations and large, and foundation grants.
Nice. I just signed up to follow you on Instagram.
Oh, good. Welcome.
And I put, you sent it to us, but I put it on for everybody to grab.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Please
the audience can follow that. It's very fun.
Well, if anybody has any questions for me, I'd love to.
Yeah, come on, folks. I guess you were just inspiring and clear.
Ruthie, what you asked such great questions. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I very much enjoy the opportunity to speak with someone about the work they do and their writing. So And I'm glad you enjoyed the event as well. And hopefully you'll join us after you get this next book out.
Absolutely. I'll be there
In person.
Yeah, then we could do it in person, which would be really
in person.
nice.
I love the little book in the corner of your screen there.
Yes, okay, I did want to mention, just before we go, the cover art is fantastic. And I don't
Thank
know who did it, but it's fantastic. And the
Thank
other
you.
thing, I read the book, but I also listened to some of your narrators work on the audiobook. And the narrator you selected did a fantastic job.
You know, Kate Mazer, she is amazing. And I'm fortunate that Scribner lets me have a lot of input on both the cover and the narrator on the audiobook. And there was a list of folk, and she was the only one. I said, if you can't get her, I don't know what we're going to do. And we have become great friends. She's so smart and so talented. I couldn't have asked for a better narrator. She really, all the voices, a hard book.
Yeah.
Because there are so many characters, and there are accents and you know, men and women and different ages, and she got it all.
How many hours of your time were involved in creating the audiobook? I mean, how much feedback do you provide?
Well, I mean, I've had other experiences that have been less enjoyable, but she's such a pro. So what happened is we talked through things that were important to me. And then she came back to me with some of her notes and her questions. And I just knew instantly. I mean, some of the things she said was so smart. I mean, for example, there was a moment in the book where she said, this is where Vera's voice is going to modulate to older, because this is a moment where you know, and I knew if there was that kind of nuance and sensitivity, I was in great hands. Yeah, we've had a total love fest. It's great. It's great. And I'm so proud that she read it. I really, she's an amazing actor. She's been on a gazillion TV shows, and she has been doing audiobooks for a long, long time.
That's very cool. Well, I guess I don't see any other questions. Jeff, do you have anything else you'd like to ask?
Well, I don't want to go into the weeds, but I'm curious about the process of audiobooks, but that's not really germane to the main point of your book. Just, you know, curious about the process of.
Well, you know, I'm fascinated in this era. I hear from so many readers who both have listened to it and read it. Like they, you know, if they're taking a walk, they'll listen to that part of the audiobook and then they'll read it. And it's a beautiful thing to be read to. It kind of brings us back to our childhood.
I do love
Just
that.
having someone tell you a story. It's actually, that's the tagline of narrative, tell me a story, because it's such a basic human desire, isn't it? Someone tell me a story, tell me a good story.
Yeah, I usually do one or the other, but occasionally I'll get both the audio and the book, and I'll go back and forth. I find that really fun too.
Yeah.
It's more expensive that way, but you know, you can, you know, and then because when you listen to something, it's just different, not seeing the text, the spelling and all that. The other thing about audiobooks I find interesting and challenging among the narrators is how you do the opposite gender's voice.
Right.
And it's not always done well, in my opinion. And especially there are multiple characters to try to sort all them out when you can't see them. It's a different medium, definitely.
I did, speaking of a word please, I did a word please with Kate it looks like her name, her first name is Kathe, but it's pronounced Kate. But I did the word voice with her. So you can go back in my IGTV and see.
Go back and take a look at that.
And she talked a lot about what is voice and how does she come to voice? How does she make the different voices?
Very cool. Well, as I said, I just have really enjoyed this opportunity to chat with you and learn more about this book. I enjoyed reading it, and but you really bring the personal touch to the story. Getting the chance to talk to me in person about this has been really a treat. So I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
And
This was a lot of fun.
Everyone listening.
Yeah,
Have a good night.
okay.
All right, stay safe.
You too. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.